Welcome to my channel Exam Trials. Today I am going to talk about Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development. Without any delay, let's get into our video. Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development, that is mental or intellectual development. Jean Piaget is regarded as one of the pioneers in psychological investigation of children. And the theory of cognitive development. Here, the cognitive development means it is the construction of thought process, including remembering, problem solving, and decision making from childhood through adolescence to adulthood. Simply, it refers to how a person perceives, thinks, and understands his or her world through the interaction of environment. Now, let's know about the key components of Piaget cognitive theory. In Piaget cognitive theory, we should know certain key components that are schema, assimilation and accommodation, adaptation, equilibrium and disequilibrium, and stages of development. These are the important key components of Piaget cognitive theory. First one is schema. What is meant by schema? Schemas are the mental pattern or the way a child understands the world, and schemas are biologically inherited. Further, we can say that these are the basic building blocks which enables us to form a mental representation of the world. Piaget called schemas as cognitive structure. So, schemas are the basic mental pattern. Next component is assimilation. Assimilation is a process which is using an existing schema to deal a new object or situation, or we can say that taking information into the existing schema. Assimilation means taking information into the existing schema. Next term is accommodation. Simply, it is the modification of existing schema. That is, it happens when the existing schema or the knowledge does not work and we need to change in order to deal with the new object or situation. So, accommodation means the modification of existing schema in order to understand the new situation. These two processes are the sub-process of adaptation, which is the adjustment with the environment. Generally, intellectual growth is considered as a process of adaptation to the world. Another important component is equilibrium. Equilibrium is the balance between assimilation and accommodation. Another term is disequilibrium, which is a state of imbalance that occurs when the present way of thinking does not help to understand a given situation or a problem. Simply, we can say that it is a conflict when new situation cannot be assimilated. Disequilibrium is a state of imbalance occurs when the present way of thinking does not help to understand a given situation or a problem. Next one is the stages of development. Piaget has explained and discussed about the different stages of cognitive development. He believed that cognitive development takes place through four fundamental stages. All children have to pass through these stages to reach to the next higher level of cognitive thinking. Now let's check out what are the stages of development. First one is sensory motor stage, and this stage starts from the time of birth to 2 years. Second one is pre-operational stage. Time duration is 2 years to 7 years. This stage is further divided into pre-conceptual stage and intuitive stages. Third stage is concrete operational stages, that is 7 years to 11 years. Last one is the formal operational stage, and the duration is 11 years to 15 years. Now let's learn about these stages in detail. First stage is sensory motor stages. As I said before, this stage or period starts from the birth to 2 years. The main characteristics of this stage is that it involves senses and motor activities. Here, children do reflexive activities such as sucking and grasping. In this stage, child observes and imitates his or her surroundings. Here, reflex means kind of response for stimuli. During this stage, simple learning occurs, but the child does not think at this stage. These early sensory motor experiences of the child have a great bearing on the development of his later intellectual abilities. And the most important characteristics of this stage is object permanence. That is, children learn to recognize objects and understand that objects have their separate permanent existence. As infants grow older, they learn that even if an object is not in front of them, it still exists. Such thought is known as object permanence. It is also known as out of sight or out of mind. Now we can point out the characteristics of sensory motor stages. One is sensation, second is reflexive action, third is object permanence or out of sight or out of mind. Then observe and imitate surroundings, does not think, goal directed action, and during the end of stage there will be another characteristics, that is deferred imitation. So these are the characteristics of sensory motor stage. Now let's pass on to the next stage, that is pre-operational stages. This stage is roughly between 2 to 7 years. It is called pre because in this stage, child cannot perform logic operations. It is called pre because in this stage, children cannot perform logical operations. This stage is categorized in two parts. The first part is called pre-conceptual stage, and it starts from the age of 2 to 4 or 6 years. Next is intuitive stage, and it starts at the age of 4 to 7 or 8 years. Preconceptual stage. This stage is roughly between 2 years to 4 or 6 years. In this stage, child develops way of representing events and objects through symbols, including verbal symbol of language. Piaget called these characteristics as symbolism. Along with this, their ideas of right and wrong are governed by the people around them. Now the children can able to think about things that are not immediately present. That is, we already learn about object permanence. Another most important characteristic of preconceptual stage is egocentrism. That is, child become primarily concerned about himself. And the Piaget called it as egocentrism. They also believe that means children also believe that others also share their same perspective because they think that it is the only perspective which exists. Now let's move on to the another sub part of pre-operational stages, that is intuitive stage. This stage covered the age between 4 to 7 or 8 years. Here, thinking is not logical and is still based on intuition, which are driven by emotion and passion. Here, children are not equipped for certain function at this stage. Examples are reversible thinking, which means children cannot do reversible thinking. Another one is reverse counting, extended family relation tree. That is, while children can do simple logical operations, they face difficulty in understanding reverse counting and extended family relations. Another most important characteristic is conservation. Children face difficulty in conservation of various concepts such as conservation of height and conservation of weight, width, etc. And the concept of conservation is a principle according to it some characteristics of an object remain the same despite change in its appearance. Conservation is nothing but it's a principle according to it some characteristics of an object remain the same despite change in its appearance. For example, regarding the conservation of volume, when a children said that glass with more height has more water than the other glass, although the volume of water was same in both glasses. Example is when a children said that glass with more height has more water than the other glass, although the volume of water was same in both glasses. This is an example for conservation of volume. Now let's move on to the summary of the characteristics of these stages. First one is illogical. First characteristic is illogical, that is, child cannot perform logical actions. Next the most important one is egocentrism. That means the child can able to think from only his side. Another most important one is centration, which means one way of thinking. Here child believes that others also have same perspective because they think it is the only perspective which exists. Important characteristics is centration. Here, child believes that others also have same perspective because they think that it is the only perspective which exists. Next one is symbolism. Child develops the ability to use symbols, languages, pictures, signs, or gestures to represent actions or objects mentally. Symbolism means child develops the ability to use symbols, languages, pictures, signs, or gestures to represent the action or objects mentally. And the most important characteristic is irreversible thinking. Child that is, child cannot do reversible thinking. Next one is can't understand conservation of volume, mass, height, weight, etc. Another most important characteristic is animism. This characteristic is by which children believe that all objects or things are living. That is, child consider all non-living things as living things. Another important characteristic is role play. Children play as doctors, teachers, Superman, etc. with those characters who influence their mind most. So role play is another characteristics of pre-operational stage. And the best technique to demonstrate egocentrism is three-dimensional display of mountains scene. That is three mountain task. Now let's talk about the educational implications of pre-operational stage. Here, as we discussed, instruction must include actions and it should be brief. Students will not be able to follow instructions continuously, so they need gaps. Another one is visual should be used for teaching. In this stage, practical experience will help learners to involve more in teaching learning process. The best method is playway method, which is the most appropriate way to teach these age groups because they enjoy playing house, dressing up and so on. Parents and teachers must use this idea while teaching them. And another one and the most important educational implication of pre-operational stage is hands-on activities facilitate cognitive development among children in this age group. Now let's move on to the next stage, that is concrete operational stage. This stage of development is usually between the age of 6 or 7 to 11 years or up to 12 years. This stage is known as school age or gang age. Main characteristics is that they can do operations on concrete object and situation. They will have difficulty in dealing with abstract concept and also have difficulty with words like assume, etc. In this stage, child develops logical operations. Here, the child able to learn to add, subtract, multiply and divide. Children can able to classify concrete objects and is still not able to make abstract thinking. Thought process becomes more rational, logical and developed. develop ability to conserve or learn that objects are not always the way that they appears to be. In this stage, they learn many things with respect to conservation, such as classification, seriation, grouping objects into categories, arranging of objects in sequential order according to one aspect such as size, weight, or volume. Another most important characteristics of this stage is that's conservation and classification, seriation, grouping of objects into categories. This stage, children develop the ability of reversible thinking. The main characteristics of concrete operational stages are logical thinking, reversible thinking, conservation, seriation, classification, decentering, that is two way of thinking, and another one is concrete thinking. These are the main characteristics of concrete operational stage. Now let's know about the educational implications of concrete operational stage. This stage provides concrete experiences for learning. Simple experiments with concrete object will facilitate their cognitive development. Second one is avoid giving too much to read. Provide limited reading. More focus should be given on concrete objects and their manipulation. Third one is multi-dimension mode should be used. Next one is complex ideas should be taught with simple examples. Part learning and teaching should be more emphasized than mass practice. These are the educational implications of concrete operational stage. Now let's move on to the last stage of development, that is formal operational stage. This age starts from 11 or 12 years to adolescence. At this stage, thought process of child become quite systematic and reasonably well integrated. Now the child can capable of abstract thinking and are able to understand the combination and coordination of numbers and variables. There will be a shift from concrete objects to abstract concepts. The most important characteristics of the formal operational stage is hypothetico-deductive reasoning. Children in this stage use the formal operations problem-solving strategy in which an individual begins by identifying at all factors that might affect the problem and then deduces systematically. Piaget called it as hypothetico-deductive reasoning. Now let's summarize the major characteristics of formal operational stage. One is child can able to think abstractly. Next one is hypothetico-deductive reasoning. Third one is induction or inductive thinking. Fourth one is deductive thinking. Fifth one is hypothesis. And last one is metacognition, which means that they can control their own thinking process. These are the major characteristics of formal operational stage. Now let's move on to the educational implication of formal operational stage. In this stage, children involve hypothetical reasoning in their thinking process. Abstract problems can be given to the learners. Next one is imagination based tasks should be provided to learners and students encouraged to use their imagination to solve the problems. Teachers should provide space to learn and understand concepts beyond rote recalling of facts. Developing abstract reasoning skills does not mean that the teacher should stop using concrete objects. This stage, the teacher should continue to use concrete experiences and objects. Now let's learn about the general educational implication of Piaget cognitive theory of development. This theory states that the child needs to be actively involved in the teaching learning process for his intellectual growth. Next one is provide a broad development perspective to the educator for building a curriculum for the children. Third one is description of developmental stages and qualitative aspects of intellectual growth is very useful in providing suitable educational practices. Fourth one is the preschool child is at the pre-operational level. The educational program at this stage should provide concrete operations. Fifth one is children learn speedily if we provide concrete material to learn them. The last one is in science and mathematics, learning from the physical environment is more important than what is learned from people, books, or television. In the case of preschool child, the child is at pre-operational level and the educational programs at this stage should provide concrete operations. So these are the general educational implications of Piaget cognitive theory of development. So far we have discussed about the key components of Piaget theory, that are schema, assimilation and accommodation, equilibrium and disequilibrium, and stages of development. Let's recall the characteristics of each stage. First, the characteristics of sensory motor stage. The features are sensation, reflexive action, object permanence or out of sight or out of mind. Next is the observe and imitates surrounding. Child cannot able to think. Another characteristic is goal directed action, and another one is deferred imitation. These are the important characteristics of sensory motor stage. Now let's look into the characteristics of pre-operational stage, that are illogical. First one, illogical. Another one is egocentrism. Next is centration, which means one way of thinking. Fourth one is symbolism. Fifth one is irreversible thinking. And another one is child cannot understand the conservation of volume, mass, height, etc. That is unable to understand the concept of conservation. Another one is animism. Last one is role play. Most important characteristics are egocentrism, centration, irreversible thinking, animism. So these are the characteristics of pre-operational stages. Now let's move on to the characteristics of concrete operational. That is, first one is logical thinking. Next is reversible thinking. Third is conservation. Fourth is situation. Fifth is classification. Sixth is decentering. That is two way of thinking. In the last stage, we have talked about centration, that is one way of thinking. In the case of concrete operational, here the characteristic is decentering, that is two way of thinking. Last characteristic is concrete thinking. These are the characteristics of concrete operational stage. And now let's look into the characteristics of formal operational stage. One is think abstractly, that is hypothetical thinking is possible. Another most important characteristics of formal operational stage is hypothetical deductive reasoning. Another one is inductive. Next is deductive thinking, and last one is it's not last. Next one is the hypothesis, and the last is metacognition. Metacognition means the child can able to control their own thinking process. These are the major characteristics of formal operational stages. So these are all about today's topic. If you find this video useful, do not forget to subscribe to my channel. Also, please like this video. Thank you. Have a good day.